A slave slept on the floor with her baby. And when the master saw it, what happened next shattered all expectations. Eliza had made an impossible choice, risking severe punishment to keep her infant from freezing in the leaking slave quarters. What unfolded in that moment defied everything expected in 1842 Virginia. The confrontation that should have ended in tragedy would instead spark a transformation that neither master nor slave could have imagined. Eliza pressed her daughter Grace to her chest, feeling the infant's heartbeat flutter against her own like a trapped bird. After 14 grueling hours stooped over in the tobacco fields, her back screamed and her arms trembled with exhaustion, but she dared not set her 3-month-old down in the flooded corner of their dilapidated cabin. The previous night's storm had torn through the slave quarters with vengeful fury, leaving gaping holes in the rotting roof and ankle-deep puddles on the dirt floor where her pallet should have been. "Hush now, little one," she whispered, her cracked lips brushing against Grace's forehead, though the baby wasn't crying. Grace had learned early, too early, that sound could bring trouble in a world where their existence itself was barely tolerated. Master Thornwood ran the tightest plantation in all of Virginia, no excuses accepted, no exceptions granted, no mercy shown to those who failed to meet his exacting standards. Just last month, he'd ordered 30 lashes for Samuel, when bone-deep exhaustion made him drop a crate of tobacco bound for export. The wound still hadn't healed properly, infection had set in, and Samuel now worked the fields with fever burning behind his eyes. Eliza surveyed the soaked bedding and the water still dripping rhythmically from above, each drop a ticking clock counting down to disaster. Grace had already been coughing for days, a wet, rattling sound that terrified Eliza more than any overseer's whip. A night in this bone-chilling dampness would surely make it worse. Maybe deadly worse. The graves of 3 slave infants who hadn't survived their first winter stood as silent testimony to this harsh reality. "Lord, help me and watch over us," she breathed, making her decision as she clutched her precious bundle tighter. The big house kitchen had a dry corner behind the cast-iron stove where embers would keep the space warm until morning. If she slipped in after the house went quiet and left before the first hint of dawn, it was worth the risk. It had to be. Grace's life depended on this desperate gamble. As midnight approached and the plantation finally fell silent under a clearing sky studded with cold, distant stars, Eliza wrapped Grace in her only spare cloth, a treasured piece of her mother's dress, and crept toward the imposing silhouette of the main house. Each cautious step felt like walking a knife's edge between salvation and the whipping post. The dried mud crunched treacherously beneath her bare feet as she moved, like a shadow across the yard, freezing at every nocturnal sound. The kitchen door creaked slightly as she eased it open, the sound thunderous in her heightened senses. She paused, heart hammering against her ribs, listening for any response from the sleeping house. Nothing, only silence. The warmth hit her immediately, a forgotten luxury that almost brought tears to her eyes. The kitchen smelled of bread and roasted meat, cruel reminders of the feast she had helped prepare but would never taste. She settled in the corner furthest from the door, curling her body protectively around Grace on the hard wooden floor, positioning herself to be hidden from immediate view should anyone enter. For the first time in days, her baby slept peacefully, tiny face relaxed in the dim, comforting glow of the banked cooking fire. Eliza allowed herself the smallest smile as she watched Grace's chest rise and fall steadily, no longer accompanied by that frightening wheeze. "Just for tonight," whispered, though she knew if they survived until tomorrow, the same impossible choice would await her again. "Just one night of warmth for you, my angel." But what Eliza couldn't know as she finally surrendered to her own exhaustion, was that Master Thornwood's chronic insomnia would soon change everything. Master James Thornwood paced his mahogany-paneled study, the grandfather clocks, persistent ticking matching the relentless throbbing behind his temples. Sleep had eluded him for the 3rd consecutive night, leaving him irritable and haunted by thoughts he couldn't quiet. The leather-bound ledgers splayed before him showed promising quarterly profits, a 15% increase over last year's already substantial returns, but the weight of managing Oak Ridge Plantation pressed down on him like an invisible yoke that grew heavier with each passing year. At 45, James had inherited this sprawling legacy 15 years ago, upon his father's sudden death. 500 acres of Virginia's most fertile soil, 73 slaves whose lives and labor were his to command, and expectations from Richmond to Charleston that the Thornwood name would continue to represent the pinnacle of plantation success. His father's imposing shadow loomed large in every decision, a constant, judging reminder of the Thornwood reputation for unwavering discipline and ruthless efficiency. "Damn this infernal headache," he muttered, pressing his fingertips against his temples where pain pulsed in time with his heartbeat. The crystal decanter of bourbon on his desk tempted him, but he'd already indulged in 2 glasses with no relief. Perhaps some warm milk would help, though he scoffed at such a childish remedy. His wife Catherine would suggest chamomile tea with honey, but she was visiting her ailing sister in Richmond for the fortnight, leaving the massive house feeling emptier and more cavernous than usual. The polished floorboards creaked beneath his silk brocade slippered feet as he made his way down the grand staircase, past the portraits of Thornwood's past, their stern eyes following his descent. A dim, flickering light caught his attention as he reached the main hall. It emanated from the kitchen at the back of the house. Had someone carelessly left a candle burning? Fire was his constant, nagging fear. One careless flame could destroy generations of Thornwood wealth, and standing in a matter of hours. James pushed the kitchen door open with more force than necessary, ready to extinguish the potential hazard, when he froze mid-step, his hand still gripping the brass doorknob. There, curled in the corner by the cast-iron stove, lay one of his field slaves. Eliza, he recalled after a moment. The one Overseer Collins had mentioned worked twice as hard since delivering her child, sleeping on his kitchen floor, and nestled against her breast was a small bundle wrapped in faded cloth that moved with gentle, rhythmic breaths. His first reaction was cold, righteous fury that surged through his veins. The rules at Oak Ridge were absolute and universally understood. No slave entered the main house after sunset unless specifically summoned for service. Punishment for such flagrant transgressions was necessarily severe and public, an example to maintain the order upon which the entire plantation system depended. He stepped forward on the quarry-tiled floor, ready to wake her with a sharp command that would make her tremble, when the baby shifted in its makeshift swaddling and he caught sight of its face in the dying firelight. The infant's cheeks were flushed with healthy color, a stark, unmistakable contrast to the sickly gray pallor he'd noticed during yesterday's field inspection, when Overseer Collins had complained about Eliza's divided attention. Something unexpected and almost forgotten stirred in James's chest as he observed the sleeping pair. Eliza's body curved protectively around her child, even in the vulnerability of sleep, one work-roughened hand resting gently on the baby's chest, as if to reassure herself of each breath. Despite her obvious exhaustion, her face remained vigilant, brows furrowed as if anticipating danger even in dreams. Dark smudges beneath her eyes spoke of sleepless nights and constant worry. James stood motionless in the kitchen doorway, profoundly conflicted. The plantation owner demanding unwavering discipline warred with something deeper, something human he thought he'd buried long ago beneath ledgers, responsibilities, and his father's constant refrain that sentiment was the enemy of prosperity. He remembered with painful clarity Catherine's gut-wrenching sobs each time the doctor confirmed another miscarriage. 5 losses in 15 years of marriage had left her fragile, and him feeling increasingly inadequate. Their last hope had ended 3 months ago with the most devastating loss, yet around the same time this slave child had been born healthy and strong despite circumstances that should have made such an outcome impossible. The irony wasn't lost on him, nor was the bitter taste it left in his mouth. As he watched the sleeping pair, unwelcome memories surfaced of his own mother, dead before his 10th birthday from a wasting illness that had transformed her from a vibrant, loving presence to a hollow-eyed ghost. His father had responded by becoming stricter, more distant, teaching James through both word and example that sentiment was weakness in a world that respected only strength, control, and the unflinching willingness to maintain one's position regardless of the cost. Yet now, in the quiet kitchen with only the crackling embers as witness, James Thornwood faced a choice that would alter the course of many lives, including his own. The master of Oakridge stood at a crossroads he had never anticipated, forced to confront the carefully constructed barriers between what he had been taught was right and what something deeper, something he couldn't quite name, whispered was human. James Thornwood cleared his throat, the sound sharp as a pistol shot in the quiet kitchen. Eliza's eyes flew open instantly, years of conditioned vigilance jolting her from sleep to full alertness in a heartbeat. Her expression transformed from momentary confusion to undisguised terror when she registered who stood before her. She scrambled to her feet with remarkable agility for someone so exhausted, clutching Grace protectively to her chest, backing against the whitewashed wall until her shoulder blades pressed hard against the cool plaster. "Master Thornwood," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the gentle popping of the dying embers. "I beg your forgiveness. The cabin was flooded from the storm, and the baby, she's been coughing something terrible. I feared she wouldn't." The words tumbled out in a desperate rush before she caught herself, knowing explanations rarely mattered. "Silence," he commanded, his voice neither raised nor particularly harsh, but carrying the unmistakable weight of absolute authority that had been his birthright. Eliza fell quiet immediately, her eyes downcast, though her arms tightened around Grace, forming a living shield between her child and whatever punishment awaited. The baby, disturbed from her peaceful sleep, let out a small whimper but didn't fully wake, instead nuzzling closer to her mother's warmth. James studied the woman before him with an intensity that made her skin prickle. She couldn't be more than 22, yet her eyes held the weariness of someone decades older. Despite her obvious fear, the slight trembling of her lower lip, the pulse visibly racing at her throat, she stood with a certain dignity that caught his attention. Shoulders back, chin slightly raised, feet planted firmly on the kitchen tiles, a posture at odds with her station and current predicament. "You know the rules of this house," he said finally, breaking the taut silence that had stretched between them. "No slaves in the main house after dark, unless specifically summoned for service." "Yes, Master." Her response was automatic, rehearsed through countless interactions with those who held power over her existence. "The punishment for such an offense is 15 lashes, administered publicly." Eliza's face remained impressively impassive, but James caught the slight tremor in her hands as she adjusted her hold on the baby, shifting Grace higher against her shoulder. She didn't plead or protest. Experience had taught her the futility of such actions. In the unforgiving calculus of plantation life, her reasons, no matter how desperate or justified, counted for nothing against established rules. "Your child is ill," James stated, not a question but a clinical observation, his tone giving away nothing of his thoughts. "She was getting better, Master. Truly she was. But our cabin took water in the storm. The roof gave way in the southeast corner where we sleep, I feared." She trailed off, swallowing hard, knowing that a slave's fears were of no consequence in the grand scheme of Oakridge Plantation. "I made a terrible mistake in judgment. I accept whatever punishment you deem appropriate." James walked deliberately to the kitchen window, looking out at the slave quarters visible as shadowy outlines in the distance. The storm had indeed been severe. He'd already instructed Overseer Collins to assess the damage at first light and calculate the cost of necessary repairs against the quarter's profit margins. The practical concerns of a businessman never far from his mind. "Your name is Eliza," he said, still facing the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. "Yes, Master." She wondered briefly if he actually remembered her name or had simply overheard it from the overseer's reports. "And the child?" He turned slightly, his profile illuminated by the faint glow from the stove. A moment's hesitation flickered across Eliza's features sharing something so personal, so precious as her daughter's name felt strangely intimate, almost dangerous. Grace. Master. Her name is Grace. James turned fully now, something indefinable flickering across his features, a softening around the eyes perhaps, or a slight parting of lips in surprise. Grace, he repeated, the name hanging in the air between them like something tangible. Catherine had wanted to name their daughter Grace, had embroidered the name with painstaking care on a small blanket during her last pregnancy, spending hours selecting the perfect shade of pale blue thread. The blanket now lay locked in a drawer in their bedroom, never used, never seen. A painful reminder of what might have been. An uncomfortable silence stretched between master and slave, broken only by the soft sounds of the baby's breathing and the dying fire's occasional crackle. A clock somewhere in the house chimed 2, the sound muffled but insistent, marking the depth of night. "My wife cannot have children," James said suddenly, surprising himself with the admission. 5 times we have tried. 5 times we have failed. He hadn't spoken these words aloud to anyone, not to Catherine, certainly not to his business associates, for whom such personal weakness would be unseemly. Eliza remained silent, unsure why her master was sharing such personal information, but understanding instinctively that this unusual conversation might be her only chance to avoid the lash. She kept her eyes respectfully lowered, though her mind raced, calculating what response might be safest. "The last one was a girl," he continued, his voice distant, almost as if he were speaking to himself rather than to her. "She lived for less than an hour. Long enough for Catherine to hold her once, long enough for us both to understand what we had lost." "I'm sorry for your loss, master," Eliza said softly, the words genuine despite everything that separated them, despite the fact that this man owned her body, her labor, and could claim her child at any moment should he wish it. In this singular moment, she recognized his grief as identical to what she would feel if Grace were taken from her. James looked at her sharply, searching for mockery or insincerity, but found none. Instead, he saw something unexpected in her dark eyes, compassion. This woman who had every reason to hate him, whose very presence in his kitchen was an act of desperate rebellion against the system he maintained, was offering genuine condolence for his pain. The realization disturbed him more than he cared to admit. "Your cabin," he said abruptly, changing course, retreating to the safer ground of property management. "It's not suitable for a child in its current condition." "No, master." Her agreement was immediate, relief evident in her voice at the shift to more practical matters. James walked to the kitchen door, his decision made, though he couldn't have explained the complex tangle of motivations behind it if asked. "You will return to your quarters before dawn. No one must know you were here tonight." Relief washed over Eliza's face, her shoulders dropping slightly as tension released. "Thank you, master. Thank you for your mercy." "I'm not finished," he said, his tone hardening slightly, reasserting the proper distance between them. "Tomorrow, you will report to the main house after your field duties are complete. Tell Overseer Collins I've required additional kitchen help while Mrs. Thornwood is away visiting her sister. You'll bring the child with you." Confusion replaced relief on Eliza's face, her brows drawing together. "Master, there's a small room off the kitchen," James explained, gesturing toward a narrow door almost hidden in the shadow of the large pantry. "It was meant for a house slave, but has stood empty since Martha passed last winter. It's dry. Warm." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Suitable for a child recovering from illness." Eliza stared at him, uncomprehending, afraid to believe what he seemed to be suggesting. "You want us to sleep there? In the main house? I want your child healthy," he corrected firmly, providing the practical justification that would make sense to anyone who might question his decision. "A sick slave is of no use to this plantation, and a dead one represents a significant financial loss. This arrangement is temporary, until proper repairs can be made to the quarters." They both understood the explanation for what it was. A rationalization that had little to do with plantation efficiency and everything to do with something neither could comfortably name. Something that threatened the carefully constructed barriers between master and slave, between property and person. Yes, master. Thank you, master. Eliza's voice was steady, but her eyes shone with unshed tears in the dim light. Tears of relief, of confusion, of cautious hope. James nodded curtly and turned to leave, then stopped, his hand resting on the door frame. The punishment for entering the house without permission stands, Eliza, but instead of the lash, you will serve in the main house for 1 month. Your field quota will be reduced accordingly, and you will assist cook with the daily meal preparation and household cleaning. It was a kindness disguised as discipline, and they both knew it. Kitchen work was exhausting in its own way, but far less brutal than the back-breaking labor of the tobacco fields under the relentless Virginia sun. One more thing, he added, his voice dropping slightly, an edge of warning entering his tone. Mrs. Thornwood returns in a fortnight. She must not know of this arrangement. Do you understand? The unspoken message was clear. Catherine Thornwood would not share her husband's unexpected mercy, would not tolerate a slave child under her roof. No matter the circumstances, her bitterness over her own childlessness had hardened into a cruelty that even James sometimes found disturbing. Yes, master, I understand completely. Eliza's response carried the weight of absolute certainty. She would guard this secret as fiercely as she protected Grace. Her child's well-being depended on it. As James Thornwood climbed the sweeping staircase back to his lonely bedroom, the grandfather clock in the hall marking his passage with solemn ticks, he wondered what his father would say about his actions tonight. Nothing favorable, certainly. The old man had believed in maintaining absolute separation between the family and the slaves. Never let them see you as anything but the master, he'd instructed James countless times. Familiarity breeds contempt, and contempt breeds rebellion. Yet for the first time in years, the crushing weight on James's chest seemed slightly lighter, as if some small portion of his carefully constructed armor had been shed, allowing him to breathe more freely. He couldn't have explained why, even to himself. In the kitchen below, Eliza sank back to the floor beside the stove, cradling Grace close, her mind racing with questions about what this unexpected turn meant for their future. Hope was dangerous for a slave. She'd learned that lesson many times over, had the scars on her back to prove it. But as she gazed down at her sleeping daughter, at the perfect curve of her cheek and the delicate flutter of her eyelashes, a tiny spark of it flickered to life, nonetheless. "We might be all right, little one," she whispered, pressing her lips to Grace's forehead. "We just might be all right." But even as the words left her mouth, Eliza knew that in their world, nothing was certain, and nothing came without cost. Whatever mercy James Thornwood had shown tonight would demand payment eventually. The only question was what form that payment would take and whether the price would be one she could bear to pay. The following week brought subtle but profound changes to Oak Ridge Plantation that rippled through the established order like stones dropped in still water. Eliza's reassignment to the main house sparked curiosity among the field hands, quiet speculation during the brief rest periods between back-breaking labor, and undisguised resentment from the existing house slaves, who viewed the newcomer with suspicion and thinly veiled hostility. The delicate hierarchy that existed among the enslaved population had been disturbed, and the consequences of such disruption remained to be seen. Martha, the head cook, a formidable woman whose 30 years at Oak Ridge had earned her a position of relative privilege and authority in the slave quarters, watched with narrowed eyes as Eliza scrubbed pots at the kitchen sink, little Grace secured to her back with a length of faded blue cloth. Martha's substantial frame moved with surprising grace as she prepared breakfast for the main house, her experienced hands working automatically while her shrewd gaze assessed the newcomer. "Master never brought field hands inside before," Martha observed on the third morning, her tone carefully neutral as she kneaded bread dough with powerful hands, darkened by decades of work, especially not ones with babies in tow. The statement hung in the air, part observation, part accusation. Eliza kept her eyes fixed on her work, remembering Master Thornwood's explicit warning about discretion. The weight of the secret arrangement pressed on her shoulders more heavily than Grace on her back. The storm damaged our cabin badly. Water came right through the roof. It's temporary, until repairs are made, she replied, the practiced explanation rolling easily from her tongue. Martha made a non-committal sound deep in her throat, neither believing nor openly challenging the explanation. Her hands punished the bread dough with renewed vigor. Just mind you don't forget your place, girl. Inside work isn't easier than field work, just different. And the mistress returns soon. She's not known for her charitable nature, particularly toward pretty young things. The implication was clear, and Eliza felt heat rise to her cheeks. I understand my position perfectly, she replied quietly, scrubbing harder at a particularly stubborn pot, her knuckles whitening with effort. That child stays quiet, at least. Martha conceded after a moment of tense silence, glancing at Grace, who was sleeping peacefully, despite the kitchen's constant clamor and the movement of her mother's body as she worked. That's a blessing in a house like this. Last girl who brought a baby inside, mistress sent her to the auction block in Richmond before the child was a month old. Couldn't stand the crying, she said. Eliza's hands faltered momentarily at this casual mention of one of the enslaved population's greatest fears, separation from their children. She'd heard the story before, whispered in the quarters as a cautionary tale, but hearing it from Martha made it suddenly, terrifyingly immediate. Grace rarely cries, she said softly, reaching back to touch her daughter's leg reassuringly, as much to comfort herself as to check on the sleeping child. She's an easy baby. Better stay that way, Martha muttered, though there was a hint of softness in her voice that hadn't been there before. The conversation ended abruptly as Samuel, the butler, entered the kitchen with his characteristic precise steps. Nearly 60, with close-cropped gray hair and impeccable posture, Samuel carried himself with a dignity that bordered on defiance. His position as head of the household staff afforded him certain privileges, including better clothing than most slaves, and the rare ability to speak directly to Master Thornwood about household matters. Master will be hosting 3 gentlemen from Richmond this afternoon, Samuel announced, his deep voice carrying the formal cadence he reserved for official instructions. Tobacco buyers looking to secure the season's best crop before their competitors. They'll arrive at 2 and stay through dinner. Martha nodded, already mentally adjusting her cooking plans for the day. How many courses is he expecting? 4, with refreshments before and brandy after. He wants the good china, the Wedgwood with the gold trim, and Grandmother Thornwood's silver service. Samuel's expression remained impassive, but there was a subtle pride in how he referenced these fine things, as if their quality somehow reflected on him. And he specifically requested your peach cobbler, Martha. The cook's stern expression softened slightly at this recognition of her specialty. Tell him it'll be perfect. As always, those Richmond men won't taste better anywhere in Virginia. When Samuel left, his footsteps fading down the hallway, Martha turned to Eliza with renewed purpose. You'll need to pick fresh peaches from the orchard for the cobbler. Take the large wicker basket from the pantry, the one with the reinforced handle, and mind you choose only the ripest fruits, with no bruises or wormholes. Eliza hesitated, uncertain about leaving the house. She hadn't been outside since coming to work in the kitchen, and she wasn't sure if her new position allowed her the freedom to move about the plantation grounds. Should I? The child can stay here, Martha interrupted, with unexpected gentleness. I'll keep an eye on her while you're gone. No sense carrying her in this heat, and the orchard's a fair distance. Surprised by this small kindness from a woman who had shown mostly suspicion until now, Eliza thanked her and carefully unwrapped the sleeping Grace from her back, placing her gently on a pallet of clean rags in the corner of the kitchen, safely away from the fire and work areas. She should sleep another hour at least, Eliza said, lingering over her daughter, reluctant to leave her even briefly. If she wakes and seems hungry, I've raised 5 children and helped with a dozen more. Martha cut in, her tone brisk but not unkind. I know what to do with a baby. Go on now, before the day gets any hotter. The morning sun felt glorious on Eliza's skin after days confined to the kitchen's perpetual dimness. As she walked the path toward the orchard, basket swinging from her arm, she allowed herself to breathe deeply, filling her lungs with the sweet summer air scented with magnolias and freshly turned earth. The vast tobacco fields stretched to her right, where dozens of slaves worked under the watchful eye of Overseer Collins. She kept her head down as she passed, not wanting to catch anyone's attention, especially Collins, whose reputation for casual cruelty was well earned. The orchard lay beyond a gentle rise, its neat rows of trees offering dappled shade that felt like a blessing after the exposed path. As she selected ripe peaches from heavy-laden branches, carefully placing each perfect specimen in her basket, Eliza allowed herself a moment of cautious optimism. The room off the kitchen was indeed dry and warm, with a small window that let in morning light and evening breezes. Grace was sleeping better than she had in months, her persistent cough nearly gone, and though the work was constant and demanding, Martha's stern but fair oversight was infinitely preferable to Overseer Collins's unpredictable violence. Perhaps this unexpected change in circumstances was truly the blessing it appeared to be. Perhaps her hopeful thoughts scattered like startled birds as a shadow fell across her basket. Looking up, she found herself face to face with Joseph, one of the field hands whose cabin adjoined hers in the slave quarters. Tall and powerfully built, with eyes that missed nothing, Joseph had been at Oak Ridge longer than Eliza, having been born on the plantation 30 years earlier. Eliza, he acknowledged, his expression guarded as he adjusted the empty water barrel he was carrying to the nearby stream. Folks been wondering about you and the little one. 3 days with no word. Then Collins says you've been moved to the house. His tone was carefully neutral, but the question was clear. She straightened, suddenly aware of her vulnerable position. Alone with a man who might harbor resentment over her changed circumstances. Joseph had always been kind, offering her extra firewood when Grace was born, sharing the occasional rabbit he managed to snare, but resentment could change even good men. The relative privileges of house slaves, better food, warmer clothing, protection from the worst physical abuses, often created divisions among the enslaved community. "We're fine," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Master assigned me kitchen duties until the cabins are repaired. Martha's keeping me busy from dawn till dusk. That's why I haven't been back to the quarters." Joseph studied her face, his dark eyes missing nothing. "Collins been saying different. Says, Master's taken a special interest in you and your girl." The implication hung heavy between them, unspoken but unmistakable. "It's not like that," Eliza said firmly, anger flaring at the suggestion. "He's letting Grace stay warm and dry, is all. The child was sick. Joseph, you heard her coughing at night." "I heard," he acknowledged, shifting the barrel to his other shoulder. "And I'm glad she's better. But masters don't give without taking, Eliza. That better than most." The reminder of her past of Grace's father, another plantation owner's son who had taken what he wanted with no concern for consequences and disappeared back to Boston, stung sharply. The fact that Grace's light brown skin and hazel eyes marked her parentage for all to see was a daily reminder of lessons Eliza had learned at terrible cost. "I know what I'm doing," she said, more confidently than she felt. "I'm protecting my daughter the best way I can." Joseph nodded slowly, his expression softening slightly. "I hope so. For both your sakes." He glanced over his shoulder toward the fields, where Collins could be seen on horseback, surveying the workers. "Best get back before you're missed. Collins has been in a foul mood since the storm damaged the tobacco in the lower field. Already took the whip to young Isaiah this morning for dropping a basket. The casual mention of violence, so common it barely warranted special notice, served as a stark reminder of what awaited if Eliza's tentative arrangement with Master Thornwood collapsed. She nodded her thanks for the warning and quickly finished filling her basket, selecting the most perfect peaches with renewed purpose. As she walked back to the main house, Joseph's warning echoed in her mind like a persistent drum. She'd been foolish to think others wouldn't notice her changed circumstances, foolish to believe she could navigate this dangerous situation without consequences. The world of Oak Ridge Plantation was small, contained, with eyes everywhere and whispers that traveled faster than wind. Entering the kitchen through the back door, she found Martha seated, in a rare moment of rest, cradling Grace in her substantial arms, humming softly as she rocked the now-awake baby. The scene was so unexpected that Eliza paused in the doorway, momentarily speechless. Martha looked up, a flicker of embarrassment crossing her features before her usual stern expression returned. "She started fussing about 10 minutes after you left," she explained, almost apologetically. "Got a good set of lungs on her when she wants something." "Thank you for watching her," Eliza said, setting down the heavy basket of peaches on the work table. The fruits gleamed in the kitchen light, their soft blush and sweet scent promising the perfect cobbler Martha was known for. The older woman handed Grace back with surprising reluctance, her calloused hands lingering briefly on the baby's soft cheek. "Been a long time since I held one so small," she said, her voice carrying a weight of memories Eliza could only guess at. "My youngest boy would be 30 now, if he'd lived. Sold to a plantation in Georgia when he was just 7. Never did hear what became of him." She spoke matter-of-factly, but the old pain was evident in the tightness around her eyes. "I'm sorry," Eliza said softly, understanding now some of Martha's initial hostility. The woman had learned the hardest lesson of enslaved motherhood, that love was a luxury they couldn't afford, that attachment only made the inevitable separations more painful. "She's a beautiful child," Martha added, rising heavily from her chair and returning to the stove, where several pots simmered. "Got a sweetness to her spirit. You can see it in her eyes." Before Eliza could respond to this unexpected softening, the kitchen door opened, and Master Thornwood entered, his tall figure momentarily blocking the light from the hallway. Both women immediately lowered their eyes in the expected gesture of deference, Martha cursing slightly while Eliza shifted Grace to her hip in a more formal posture. "Martha, I wanted to confirm the menu for this afternoon's gathering," James began, then stopped as he noticed Eliza standing by the table of peaches. You've returned. Good. The peaches look excellent." "Yes, Master." "Thank you, Master," Eliza murmured, keeping her eyes respectfully lowered, though she could feel his gaze on her and Grace. An awkward silence followed, broken only by the bubbling of pots on the stove and the ticking of the kitchen clock. Then Grace, with the perfect timing of the very young, let out a happy gurgle and reached a tiny hand toward the shiny gold buttons on James's waistcoat. Momentarily forgetting the social boundaries she was years from understanding, something flickered across his face, amusement, perhaps, or something more complex and difficult to name. For a moment, it seemed he might reach out to the child, might allow that small hand to grasp his finger as babies instinctively do, but he quickly composed himself, clasping his hands behind his back in a formal posture. "Martha, ensure everything is perfect for our guests this afternoon," he said, his tone becoming brisk and professional once more. "These gentlemen represent significant business opportunities for Oak Ridge, and I want them suitably impressed with our hospitality." "Of course, Master. I'll see to it personally," Martha replied, her own manner shifting to match his formality. He turned to leave, then paused at the door, glancing back at Eliza. "When you've finished assisting with preparations for the dinner, there are some linens in the east wing that need attention. Samuel will show you what needs to be done." "Yes, Master," Eliza responded automatically, though her stomach tightened with apprehension. After he departed, Martha raised a skeptical eyebrow. her earlier warmth replaced by concern. Linens in the East Wing? That's normally Jane's responsibility. Jane was the upstairs maid, responsible for the family bedrooms and private areas of the house. Eliza's unease deepened at Martha's tone. The East Wing contained the family bedrooms, including the master's chamber. Joseph's warning echoed louder in her mind. "I'll go where I'm told," she said carefully, avoiding Martha's searching gaze. The older woman studied her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "See that you do. But remember, Mistress Thornwood returns in 3 days, and she notices everything." The warning hung in the air between them, adding another layer to Eliza's growing anxiety. She busied herself washing the peaches, trying to focus on the immediate task rather than the uncertain future, but her thoughts kept returning to what awaited her in the East Wing. The morning passed in a flurry of activity as the kitchen staff prepared for the important dinner. Eliza worked alongside Martha, learning the cook's exacting standards and complex recipes. Despite her concerns, she found herself enjoying the work, the precise measurements, the transformation of simple ingredients into elegant dishes. The approval in Martha's eyes. When she mastered a new technique, Grace remained contentedly strapped to her back for most of the morning, occasionally transferred to the pallet in the corner when Eliza needed both hands free for more delicate tasks. To Eliza's surprise, even Samuel unbent enough to chuck the baby under her chin when he thought no one was looking, his dignified demeanor softening momentarily. Later that afternoon, with the dinner preparations well in hand, and the Richmond gentleman ensconced in Master Thornwood's study discussing tobacco prices, Samuel led Eliza up the back staircase to the East Wing. Grace was sleeping again, a warm weight against Eliza's back as they climbed the narrow servants' stairs. "These are the family bedrooms," Samuel explained in hushed tones as they reached the upper floor. His formal manner had returned now that they were in the most private section of the house. "The linens need changing in the blue guest room, the green guest room, and Master Thornwood's chamber. Fresh sheets are in this linen closet, the Egyptian cotton for the master's bed, regular linens for the guest rooms." He showed her the proper way to turn down the beds, the exact placement of pillows according to the mistress's exacting standards, and how to air the rooms without allowing excessive sunlight that might fade the expensive furnishings. "Master Thornwood is particularly particular about his bedding," Samuel informed her as they stood outside the closed door of the master's chamber. His voice had dropped even lower, though there was no one else on the floor to hear them. "Egyptian cotton only, pressed with lavender water. You'll find everything you need in the closet. Be thorough but quick, these rooms should not be disturbed for longer than necessary." With that final instruction, he left her to complete the task, his footsteps fading as he returned downstairs to oversee the dining room preparations. Eliza stood for a moment outside the master's door, gathering her courage before entering this most private of domains. The master's chamber was larger than the entire slave cabin she shared with 3 other women and their children, furnished with pieces whose cost could have purchased several human lives at auction. A massive 4-poster bed dominated the room, its mahogany frame gleaming in the afternoon light that filtered through heavy brocade curtains. A writing desk stood near the window, papers neatly stacked and weighted with a silver paperweight shaped like a tobacco leaf. A dressing table with a silver-backed brush set and crystal bottles of cologne spoke of masculine vanity, while a small table near the fireplace held a decanter of amber liquid and 2 crystal glasses. Eliza worked efficiently, stripping the bed with practiced movements despite the unfamiliar grandeur of her surroundings. Grace continued to sleep peacefully, unaware of the significance of their presence in this forbidden space. The fresh sheets from the linen closet released the delicate scent of lavender as Eliza shook them out, the fine cotton sliding like water through her fingers as she tucked precise hospital corners and smoothed every wrinkle. As she changed the pillowcases, plumping the feather pillows to Master Thornwood's preference, as Samuel had instructed, she noticed a small drawer in the bedside table, slightly ajar. Without meaning to, she glimpsed what lay inside a corner of pale blue fabric embroidered with delicate stitching peeking out from the partially open drawer. The name, Grace, was visible, worked in tiny, perfect stitches. Eliza's hands froze in the act of arranging the pillows. The coincidence of the name, her daughter's name, on what appeared to be a baby's blanket hidden in the master's private drawer, sent a chill through her despite the warm afternoon. Without thinking, she pushed the drawer closed with a gentle but decisive movement. Some secrets were not meant for her to know. Some connections too dangerous to acknowledge. She was finishing the bed, smoothing the counterpane with careful attention to its drape, when the door opened without warning, and Master Thornwood himself entered. Eliza froze, horrified to be caught in his private space despite having been sent there on his own orders. "Sir, I was just," Samuel said the linens. She stammered, instinctively backing away from the bed, her heart suddenly pounding so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "It's all right, Eliza," he said, his voice oddly gentle, lacking the sharp edge of command she was accustomed to. "I asked for you specifically." Her heart hammered against her ribs with renewed force. "Master." He walked to the window, keeping a careful distance between them that somehow made the situation more rather than less unsettling. His reflection was visible in the glass as he looked out over the plantation grounds, his expression thoughtful, almost troubled. "How is your daughter?" he asked after a moment of silence, still facing the window. "She seems improved since you've been staying in the house." "She is much better, Master, thanks to your kindness." Eliza kept her voice steady with effort, her mind racing as she tried to understand the purpose of this unusual conversation. He nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. "And the arrangement is satisfactory? The room by the kitchen is comfortable enough?" "Yes, Master. Very much so." She hesitated, then added with genuine feeling, "It's more than I could have hoped for." James turned from the window to face her fully, his expression unreadable. "I've been thinking about your situation, Eliza, about Grace's future." Fear sliced through her like a blade of ice. This, then, was the moment she'd been dreading since that night in the kitchen when the true price of his mercy would be named. She fought to keep her expression neutral, though her arms tightened around Grace instinctively. "The child is healthy now," he continued, his eyes moving to the sleeping baby on Eliza's back. "Strong. She'll fetch a good price in a few years. Mixed blood children often sell well as house slaves in New Orleans." Eliza couldn't breathe. The casual mention of selling her child as if discussing the value of a colt or a piece of furniture made the room spin around her. This was the reality she had momentarily allowed herself to forget, that in the eyes of the law, Grace was not her daughter but Master Thornwood's property to dispose of as he saw fit. Unless, James said, watching her reaction carefully, arrangements could be made for her to remain at Oak Ridge, permanently. Hope and suspicion warred within her, both equally dangerous. "What arrangements, Master?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice from trembling. "I've spoken with Reverend Caldwell about establishing a small school for the plantation children," he said, moving to his desk and straightening papers that were already perfectly Prensit, aligned. Reading, basic arithmetic, proper speech, skills that might increase their value to the plantation. Eliza stared at him, uncomprehending. Teaching slaves to read was illegal in Virginia, punishable by fines for the teacher and whipping for the slave. Even suggesting such a thing was dangerous, potentially ruinous for a man in Master Thornwood's position. Of course, officially, it would be religious instruction only, he added, his meaning clear. This would be their secret, another one to keep, another layer of complicity between them. The Reverend is progressive in his views and believes education is a Christian duty, regardless of station. Why would you do this? Why would you do this? The question escaped before she could stop herself, the words hanging dangerously in the air between them. James looked away, his expression unreadable. Perhaps I'm merely being practical. Educated house slaves command higher prices at auction. It's a sound investment. They both knew it was more than that, though neither could safely acknowledge the truth aloud. Something was shifting in James Thornwood, some fundamental questioning of the system he had been born into, and that had shaped his entire existence. Whether that questioning stemmed from moral awakening or personal discontent remained to be seen. Grace would be part of this. School? Eliza asked carefully, allowing herself to consider the possibility. When she's old enough? Yes. And you would assist the Reverend? Given your own literacy. He said it casually, as if this knowledge of her secret ability was inconsequential. Eliza's shock must have shown on her face, for he added, "Did you think I didn't know? That I hadn't noticed how you study the spines of books when you dust the library, or how your eyes follow the text of the Bible during Sunday services? Someone taught you, and taught you well." "My first mistress," Eliza admitted softly, seeing no point in denial. "Before I was sold to Oak Ridge, she was elderly and lonely, and I was a child. She taught me alongside her grandchildren until her son discovered it." James nodded, as if this confirmed something he had already guessed. "Then you understand the value of what I'm proposing, and the risks." It was far more than agreeable. It was a miracle, a chance she'd never dared hope for. Education was the one thing no one could take from you, the key that might someday unlock doors to freedom. But experience had taught Eliza that miracles often came with hidden costs, and offers that seemed too good to be true invariably were. "And what would you expect in return, Master?" she asked, her voice steady despite her fear. The question was dangerously direct, but she needed to understand the terms of whatever bargain he was proposing. James met her gaze directly, something like respect in his eyes at her forthrightness. "Loyalty, Eliza. Complete loyalty. To me, not to Oak Ridge. Do you understand the distinction?" She did, all too clearly. He was asking her to choose him over the plantation, over the system itself. To bind her future and Grace's to his personal protection rather than the institution of slavery. To keep his secrets as he would keep hers. It was dangerous for both of them, in ways that went beyond the legal prohibitions against teaching slaves to read. It created a bond that crossed boundaries neither could afford to acknowledge openly. "I understand," she said finally, making her decision. "And I accept." "Good." He moved toward the door, then stopped, his hand on the polished brass doorknob. "One more thing. Mrs. Thornwood must never know of these arrangements. Her views on such matters are different from mine." "Yes, Master." As he left, closing the door quietly behind him, Eliza sank onto the edge of the freshly made bed, her legs suddenly too weak to support her. Grace stirred against her back, making small sounds of waking, blinking up with innocent eyes that knew nothing of the complex bargain just struck, the dangerous path now set before them. "What have I done?" Eliza whispered, reaching back to stroke her daughter's cheek. "What have I agreed to?" But deep down, she knew the answer. She had done what mothers had always done in impossible situations, chosen survival and hope for her child, no matter the risk to herself. In a world where she owned nothing, not even her own body, she had seized the one possibility offered for Grace to have something better. She rose from the bed, carefully smoothing the counterpane to erase any sign of her momentary weakness. As she moved around the room, completing her assigned tasks with renewed purpose, she made a silent vow to herself and to her daughter. Whatever came of this dangerous arrangement, whatever price she ultimately had to pay, she would ensure that Grace received the gift of knowledge, the one thing that might someday set her free. Outside the window, storm clouds gathered on the distant horizon, a fitting backdrop for the tempest that would soon engulf Oak Ridge Plantation and everyone within its boundaries. Change was coming, as inexorable as the approaching storm, and none of them, master or slave, would emerge unaltered. Catherine Thornwood's return to Oakridge occurred on a Thursday afternoon, 3 days earlier than expected. The plantation had been preparing for her arrival on Sunday, the house slaves polishing silver and airing out rooms, the gardeners cutting fresh flowers for her favorite vases, when the sound of carriage wheels on the gravel drive sent everyone into a flurry of panicked activity. "She's back early," Martha hissed, shoving Eliza toward the back stairs. "Get upstairs and help Jane with the mistress's trunks. And for heaven's sake, leave the child with me." Eliza hesitated, reluctant to be separated from Grace. "Go," Martha insisted, already untying the cloth that secured the baby. "The mistress can't see her here. Not yet." With no choice but to comply, Eliza rushed upstairs, smoothing her apron and tucking stray hairs beneath her headscarf. She reached the front hall just as Samuel opened the grand entrance doors, revealing Catherine Thornwood descending from her carriage, her expression pinched with displeasure. "Madame," Samuel greeted with a perfect bow. "We weren't expecting you until Sunday." "Clearly," Catherine replied, her critical gaze sweeping the entrance hall. "My sister's household became unbearable. Too many children, too much noise." She removed her gloves with sharp, precise movements. "Where is my husband?" "Master Thornwood is meeting with the tobacco factors in Richmond, ma'am. He's expected back tomorrow." Catherine's mouth tightened further. "Of course he is. Well, don't just stand there, see to my luggage, and send someone to prepare a bath immediately." As Samuel directed the footmen to bring in the trunks, Catherine noticed Eliza hovering uncertainly at the edge of the hall. "Who is this?" she demanded, her pale blue eyes narrowing. "I don't recognize her." Samuel stepped forward smoothly. "Eliza." "Ma'am." Master Thornwood assigned her to kitchen duties after the storm damaged the slave quarters. She's been assisting with household tasks as needed. Catherine studied Eliza with cold assessment. "From the fields, is she?" "Well, she seems clean enough, I suppose. She can help Jane unpack my things." With that, she swept up the main staircase, leaving a trail of expensive perfume in her wake. Eliza followed at a respectful distance, her heart hammering. The mistress's unexpected return had caught them all unprepared, and the carefully constructed arrangement that had protected Grace for the past week suddenly seemed terribly fragile. In the master bedroom, Catherine immediately began issuing instructions, her voice sharp with fatigue and irritation. "The blue traveling dress goes to the laundry. It's positively covered in road dust. The evening gowns need airing. And where is that new bonnet I ordered? Before leaving? It should have been delivered by now." As Eliza and Jane worked to unpack the extensive wardrobe, Catherine paced the room, commenting on changes made in her absence. "Who moved my silver brush set? And these curtains were to be changed to the summer weight. Really, the household falls into complete disarray the moment I step foot off the property." Her complaints paused abruptly when she opened the bedside table drawer. "What's this doing here?" she asked, her voice suddenly dangerously quiet. Eliza glanced up to see Catherine holding the blue embroidered baby blanket she had glimpsed earlier in the week. The name Grace was clearly visible, worked in delicate stitching. I don't know, ma'am," Jane stammered, looking genuinely confused. Catherine's gaze hardened as she folded the blanket with precise, angry movements. "This belongs in the attic with the other things. I've told James repeatedly that I don't wish to see it." She thrust the blanket at Eliza. "You, take this to the attic immediately. The trunk, with the brass fittings in the far corner. See that it's properly stored." Eliza murmured, accepting the blanket with trembling hands. The coincidence of the name, her daughter's name, on this blanket, clearly meant for a child the Thornwoods had lost, felt significant in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. The attic was stifling in the summer heat, dust motes dancing in the shafts of light that penetrated the small windows. Eliza found the trunk easily enough, its brass fittings gleaming dully in the dim light. Inside were other baby items, tiny gowns, soft blankets, a silver rattle, all carefully preserved but hidden away from daily view. As she placed the blue blanket among these treasures, Eliza's heart ached for the children the Thornwoods had lost, and for Catherine's evident pain. Perhaps this explained some of Master Thornwood's interest in Grace, a displaced paternal instinct seeking outlet. When Eliza returned to the kitchen hours later, exhausted from Catherine's endless demands, she found Martha waiting with Grace, who reached for her mother with delighted recognition. "The mistress has been asking questions," Martha warned, handing over the baby. "Wanted to know why we needed extra help in the kitchen. I told her it was temporary, just until you return to the fields next week." Eliza's stomach dropped. "Did she believe you?" Martha shrugged. "For now. But she's sharp, that one. Notices everything. What about tonight? Where will Grace and I sleep?" The cook's expression softened slightly. "You can still use the room for now. Just be extra careful. Rise before dawn, keep the child quiet, and make sure you're never seen entering or leaving." That night, as Eliza nursed Grace in the small room off the kitchen, she heard voices from the main house, Catherine's high, clear tones, and then, unexpectedly, James Thornwood's deeper response. He had returned from Richmond a day early, pressing her ear to the wall. She strained to hear their conversation. "Completely inappropriate," Catherine was saying, her voice rising with emotion. "Field hands in the main house. James, what were you thinking?" "It was a practical decision after the storm," he replied, his tone measured. "The girl is capable and works hard. That's hardly the point. There are standards to maintain. What will people say? I wasn't aware we needed the approval of others to manage our own household." Catherine's laugh was brittle. "Of course you weren't. You never are." "Well, I've already told Martha that the girl returns to the fields on Monday. We'll need to replace those damaged cabins anyway, might as well start with hers." There was a long pause before James spoke again, his voice now dangerously quiet. "You've overstepped, Catherine. Plantation management is my domain, not yours. Is it management that concerns you, or something else entirely? Don't think I haven't noticed how this particular slave caught your attention. She's pretty enough, I suppose, in that common way. That's enough." The sharp sound of a hand hitting the table punctuated his words. "You will not speak of such things in this house." "Why not? It wouldn't be the first time a Thornwood man found distraction in the quarters. Your father, certainly." "My father is not the subject of this discussion," James interrupted coldly. "And neither is Eliza. She will remain in the house until I decide otherwise." "That is final." Footsteps approached the kitchen, and Eliza quickly retreated to her room, heart pounding. The conversation confirmed her worst fears. She had become a point of contention between master and mistress, a dangerous position for any slave. The following days brought increasing tension to Oakridge. Catherine's displeasure manifested in 1,000 small cruelties, impossible standards, arbitrary punishments, cutting remarks. Though she never directly countermanded her husband's orders regarding Eliza, she found countless ways to make the young woman's life difficult. "The silver isn't properly polished," she would announce, inspecting a perfectly gleaming candelabra. "Do it again." Or, "These linens are improperly pressed. I expect better work from house slaves." Eliza endured it all silently, keeping her head down and Grace out of sight. But the strain of constant vigilance wore on her. Dark circles forming beneath her eyes as she rose earlier and retired later, trying to minimize her visibility. Martha and Samuel provided what protection they could, assigning her tasks away from Catherine's direct supervision when possible. Even Jane, initially resentful of the newcomer, began to show small kindnesses, warning Eliza when Catherine was in a particularly foul mood or covering for her brief absences to feed Grace. A week after Catherine's return, Eliza was summoned to the master's study, a rare occurrence that sent ripples of speculation through the household staff. She found James Thornwood standing by the window, his expression troubled. "Close the door," he instructed, waiting until she complied before continuing. I understand my wife has been difficult. Eliza kept her eyes lowered. The mistress expects high standards. Master, I try to meet them. Yes, I'm sure you do. He sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that seemed uncharacteristically vulnerable. The situation is complicated, Eliza, more so than you know. She remained silent, sensing that he needed to speak rather than be spoken to. I've arranged for Reverend Caldwell to begin the instruction we discussed, Sunday afternoons, in the old spring house beyond the orchard. It's far enough from the main house to avoid unwanted attention. Hope flared within her. Despite Catherine's return and the increased tension, he was proceeding with the school. Thank you, Master. As for your current position, he continued, I've decided you should remain in the house, permanently. Your work has been satisfactory, and Martha speaks well of you. Relief flooded through her, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. And Grace, the child can stay with you. But discretion is essential. Catherine must not know she's here. Not yet. He paused, weighing his next words. My wife's feelings about children are complicated by our own losses. I understand, Master. And she did, perhaps better than he realized. The blue blanket in the attic had told its own story. There's one more thing, James added, moving to his desk and retrieving a small package wrapped in plain brown paper. For your daughter. Eliza accepted it with trembling hands, unwrapping it to reveal a tiny dress of fine cotton, simply made but of much better quality than anything a slave child would normally wear. It was to be for our daughter, James said quietly. It seems a shame for it to remain unused. The gift was dangerous evidence of special treatment that could fuel Catherine's suspicions and resentment among the other slaves. But it was also a tangible symbol of his commitment to protecting Grace. Thank you, Eliza whispered, carefully rewrapping the dress. Grace will only wear it in our room, where no one can see. He nodded, apparently satisfied. You may go. Send Samuel to me on your way out. As Eliza left the study, the package concealed in her apron pocket, she nearly collided with Catherine, who was walking briskly down the hallway. The mistress's eyes narrowed suspiciously. What were you doing in my husband's study? She demanded. Master Thornwood had questions about the kitchen arrangements, ma'am, Eliza replied, the lie coming easily. He asked me to send Samuel to him. Catherine studied her face, clearly searching for evidence of deceit. I see. Well, don't dawdle. There's silver to be polished in the dining room. Yes, ma'am. Right away. As Eliza hurried toward the kitchen, she could feel Catherine's gaze boring into her back. The mistress might have accepted her explanation for now, but her suspicions had clearly been aroused. The precarious balance of Oakridge was shifting, and Eliza sensed that a reckoning was approaching, one that would change all their lives irrevocably. That night, as she held Grace close in their small room, Eliza made a decision. If she was to protect her daughter in this increasingly dangerous situation, she needed allies beyond the main house. Tomorrow, she would find a way to visit the quarters and speak with Joseph. The time had come to prepare for all possibilities, including the need to flee. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance as another summer storm approached. But this time, Eliza and Grace had shelter from the rain. The question remained, how long would that shelter last when the storms within Oakridge proved potentially more devastating than any natural tempest?